On a crisp autumn evening, when shadows stretched long across the pavement and the city hummed with the rhythm of people rushing home, a small artisan bakery on Maple Street glowed like a beacon against the darkening sky. Inside, the aroma of cinnamon rolls, chocolate croissants, and buttercream frosting wrapped around customers like a warm embrace, where every shelf promised comfort and every display case whispered of sweetness waiting to be savored. But standing at the entrance, separated from all that abundance by an invisible wall built from circumstance and desperation, stood a woman whose world had collapsed into a single, fragile wish. Her name was Raina Matthews, a 30-year-old black woman whose clothes hung loose on a frame that had forgotten what regular meals felt like, whose eyes carried the haunted weight of too many sleepless nights spent worrying in the dark. At her side, small fingers wrapped tightly in hers, stood her 7-year-old daughter Zara, whose wide brown eyes darted between the decorated cakes behind glass and the polished floor beneath her worn shoes, as if daring to look directly at what she couldn't have would shatter what little hope remained. Raina's shoulders trembled as she gathered the courage to step inside, because neither of them had eaten a proper meal since 2 days ago, and Zara's birthday was tomorrow, her 8th, and there would be no celebration, no gift, no cake unless Raina could swallow her pride and ask for something others discarded without a second thought. If you believe that compassion can bridge any distance, if you believe that one moment of humanity can rewrite someone's entire story, please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, Nal's Haven. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us why kindness matters. Inside the bakery, everything felt painfully, impossibly luxurious to Raina. Rows of artisan breads stacked like edible architecture, pastries glazed and gleaming like precious jewels, cakes decorated with such care they could have been mistaken for art installations in a gallery. She lowered her gaze, afraid the hunger in her eyes would be too naked, too desperate, that it would burn holes through her already threadbare dignity. Zara pressed close to her mother's side, her small hand gripping Raina's fingers so tightly it almost hurt, a lifeline they both desperately needed. The mother approached the counter with steps that felt too heavy, the polished tile floor seeming too clean, too bright for someone wearing shoes held together with hope and duct tape. Behind the counter stood Elise Carter, the store manager, a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes that had clearly witnessed too many hard luck stories. 2 other employees moved through the space nearby, restocking shelves and arranging displays for tomorrow's rush, their movements practiced and efficient. Everything about the bakery spoke of order and routine and rules carefully maintained. Raina's throat constricted as she prepared to break all 3. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, each word costing her a piece of dignity she could barely afford to lose. She asked if they had any expired cake, anything from yesterday or the day before, anything destined for the dumpster that she could take home for her daughter's birthday tomorrow. The words hung in the air like smoke, and suddenly the warm bakery felt cold enough to freeze hope itself. What Raina didn't know was that someone else stood in the bakery that evening, observing everything with the quiet, focused attention of a man who had learned to see beyond the surface of things. Adrian Kingsley, a 40-year-old entrepreneur whose net worth could buy the entire block, stood near the window display wearing dark jeans and a simple navy sweater instead of the designer suits his boardroom demanded. He had stepped into the bakery seeking something he rarely found anymore: anonymity, a place where no one knew his name or his fortune, where he could be just another customer enjoying a slice of lemon tart and a moment of peace before returning to his empty mansion. He had come for something sweet to cut through the bitterness of another day lived without purpose, but life had served him something far more important than dessert. As Raina spoke those heartbreaking words, expired cake, delivered with such shame it was almost physically painful to witness, Adrian felt something shift deep in the hollow place where his heart used to be. People often believe that wealth turned hearts cold, that success built walls around compassion. But in his case, loss had already done that 3 years ago. He had buried his wife Sophie and his 9-year-old daughter Emma after a house fire that started from faulty wiring, a fire that happened while he was closing a business deal 3 states away, choosing money over being home when his family needed him most. Since that night, wealth had felt meaningless, success had tasted like ash in his mouth, and he moved through life like a ghost haunting his own existence. Yet here, In the soft lighting of a quiet neighborhood bakery, a weary mother's trembling voice cracked open a corner of that broken, sealed-off heart. Elise Carter shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, her kind eyes clouding with conflict. Company policy was clear. No food could be given away before closing time, and expired products had to be logged and discarded according to health regulations. She wanted to help. The compassion in her expression was genuine, real. But rules existed for reasons, and she had a job to protect, bills of her own to pay. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken apologies and impossible circumstances that felt heavier than any words could carry. Raina felt shame bloom across her cheeks like a fever, hot and consuming. She had known this would be humiliating, had prepared herself for rejection, but hunger had a way of eroding pride until only raw need remained. She thought about turning back, escaping the embarrassment, pretending she had never asked, disappearing back into the shadows where people like her belonged. But then Zara tugged gently on her sleeve, not asking for anything, never asking anymore because she'd learned that lesson too young, just reminding her mother that she was there, that they were together, that somehow they would survive this too. Children from broken circumstances learned early which dreams were safe to dream and which ones invited only disappointment. Adrian noticed everything. The way the little girl tried to make herself smaller, invisible, as if taking up less space would make the world hurt less. The way Raina fought so hard to stand tall despite the weight of circumstances crushing down on her shoulders. He could almost hear echoes of his own daughter in Zara's careful silence, see Emma's face in those hopeful eyes that expected nothing but still hoped for everything. Something inside him broke in the most human way possible, not shattering, but cracking open, letting light into a place that had been dark for too long. It wasn't pity driving him. It wasn't some wealthy person's guilt or the desire to play savior. It was recognition, the recognition of suffering he knew intimately, the understanding that life sometimes crushes people not because they deserved it, but because cruelty is random and relentless and unfair. In that moment, standing in a bakery filled with sweetness and light, Adrian Kingsley didn't see a homeless woman or a starving child. He saw two souls pushed to the margins by circumstances beyond their control, standing at the doorway of a place filled with warmth they weren't sure they deserved. In that moment, Adrian made a decision that had nothing to do with business strategy or calculated generosity or tax write-offs. He simply stepped forward, not as a millionaire, not as someone seeking recognition or praise, but as a human being who remembered what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. One person choosing to step forward when everyone else steps back. What happened next would change 3 lives in ways none of them could have predicted. But it started with one quiet step forward, one hand raised to get Elise's attention, and one man deciding that if he couldn't save his own family, perhaps he could honor their memory by helping someone else's. The autumn evening had brought Raina Matthews to the edge of despair, standing in a bakery asking for garbage to feed her child. But sometimes, when darkness feels absolute, that's exactly when light finds a way in. And sometimes, that light comes from the most unexpected places, carried by someone whose own broken heart still remembers how to feel. To understand why this moment mattered so much, why Adrian Kingsley's hands trembled slightly as he watched this scene unfold, why his next decision would mean everything, you have to go back 3 years, to a night when fire took everything he loved and left him with nothing but money and an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. 3 years ago, on a cold February night, Adrian Kingsley stood in a hotel room in Chicago, champagne in hand, celebrating the biggest acquisition of his career. His phone rang at 11:47 p.m., a time he would never forget, would never stop seeing when he closed his eyes, and the world as he knew it ended in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Mr. Kingsley?" The voice belonged to a police officer whose name Adrian would never remember, whose face he would never see. "There's been a fire at your residence. I'm so sorry, but your wife and daughter, they didn't make it out." The champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hotel room floor in slow motion, each shard catching light like tiny fragments of the life he'd just lost. He remembered sinking to his knees among the broken glass, remembered the way his business partners' voices faded to white noise, remembered thinking with terrible clarity, I chose a deal over being home. I chose money over them. And now they're gone. The fire had started in the walls, investigators later told him. Faulty wiring in a house he'd bought because it was historic and impressive, because it looked good in business magazines, because it screamed success. He'd ignored Sophie's concerns about the electrical work that needed updating, had told her he'd handle it next month, after this deal closed, after that merger finalized, after he had time. But time, as it turned out, was something you couldn't buy back, couldn't negotiate for, couldn't acquire no matter how much wealth you'd accumulated. Sophie had been 36, brilliant and patient, an art teacher who painted landscapes that somehow captured light in ways that made you believe the world was more beautiful than it actually was. Emma had been 9 years old, gap-toothed and giggly, obsessed with dinosaurs and knock-knock jokes that never quite made sense, but made you laugh anyway because her joy was infectious. They died from smoke inhalation in their sleep, the medical examiner assured him, as if that knowledge could somehow soften the blow. As if there was any soft way to lose everything. The funeral passed in a blur of black suits and pitying faces and casseroles from neighbors who didn't know what else to offer. Adrian stood at their graves and felt nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because the grief was so enormous it couldn't fit inside a human body. It simply hollowed him out instead, scraped him clean of everything except the mechanical functions necessary to keep breathing. In the months and years that followed, Adrian discovered that wealth meant nothing when you had no one to share it with. Success tasted like ash in his mouth. Every new deal, every profitable quarter, every achievement that would have once filled him with pride now felt like a bitter mockery. What was the point of building an empire when the only people he'd wanted to share it with were buried in Evergreen Cemetery under matching headstones? He moved through life mechanically after that, a ghost haunting his own existence. He still closed deals, still made investments, still attended board meetings and charity galas, but only because momentum carried him forward, not because anything mattered anymore. His colleagues learned to accept his coldness, his emotional distance. Some called him ruthless. Others said success had changed him. None of them knew that it wasn't success that had turned his heart to stone, it was loss. His mansion stood empty except for him and a housekeeper who came twice a week and knew better than to speak unless spoken to. 23 rooms filled with expensive furniture and perfect interior design and absolute silence. Emma's room remained exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her bed unmade because he'd told her she could make it when she got home from school, her dinosaur collection arranged on shelves, her half-finished homework on her desk. He couldn't bring himself to change anything, to erase the last physical evidence that she'd existed, that she'd been real, that he'd once been someone's father. Some nights he stood in her doorway, not going in, just looking, remembering the way she used to run to him when he came home from work, remembering her voice calling Daddy, with such pure excitement, as if his arrival was the best part of her day. He'd give everything he owned, every dollar, every property, every investment, for just one more hug, one more terrible knock-knock joke, one more chance to tell her he loved her. Me twice a week, and knew better than to speak unless spoken to. 23 rooms filled with expensive furniture and perfect interior design and absolute silence. Emma's room remained exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her bed unmade because he'd told her she could make it when she got home from school, her dinosaur collection arranged on shelves, her half-finished homework on her desk. He couldn't bring himself to change anything, to erase the last physical evidence that she'd existed, that she'd been real, that he'd once been someone's father. But the dead don't answer prayers, and time only moves forward, carrying you further and further from the people you've lost until the memories start to blur at the edges and you panic because forgetting feels like losing them all over again. Standing in the bakery on Maple Street, watching Raina Matthews beg for expired cake for her daughter's birthday, Adrian felt something crack in the walls he'd built around what remained of his heart. Zara couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, close to the age Emma had been. She had the same cautious hope in her eyes, the same way of trying to make herself invisible, to want nothing so her mother wouldn't hurt more. Emma had done that too, in those last months when money had gotten tight before the big deals started closing. When Sophie had worried quietly about bills and Emma had stopped asking for things she wanted, had learned too young that love sometimes meant not asking. Adrian watched the little girl tug on her mother's sleeve, offering comfort instead of requesting it, and something in his chest twisted so painfully he almost gasped. Raina stood at that counter with her shoulders trembling and her dignity hanging by a thread, and Adrian saw Sophie in that exhausted determination, that fierce maternal love that would endure any humiliation if it meant protecting her child. The recognition of suffering he knew too intimately crashed over him in waves. These weren't just strangers in need. They were mirrors reflecting his own tragedy back at him, showing him what loss looked like from a different angle, reminding him that grief came in countless forms and broke hearts in countless ways. Memories flooded back unbidden. Emma's birthday parties with homemade cakes decorated with plastic dinosaurs. Sophie laughing in their kitchen, flower in her hair. Emma's favorite cake, strawberry with cream, pink frosting that got all over her face when she ate it. The joy in her eyes when she blew out her candles, making wishes he'd never know, wishes that would never come true. He'd spent 3 years trying to forget, because remembering hurt too much. But standing here, watching Raina Matthews fight for her daughter's birthday wish, Adrian understood with sudden clarity that forgetting was its own kind of death. Maybe the pain of remembering was the price of having loved at all. Maybe feeling that pain meant his heart could still beat for something other than obligation. His hands trembled slightly as he held his untouched lemon tart, the plate feeling suddenly heavy, or perhaps it was the weight of the decision forming in his mind, crystallizing into something solid and real and necessary. If he couldn't save his own family, perhaps he could honor their memory by helping someone else's. Emma would have wanted that. Sophie would have wanted that. And maybe, doing something good with this hollow life he'd been living might bring some small measure of meaning to the senseless tragedy that had taken them from him. Elise Carter opened her mouth to respond to Raina's request, her expression apologetic, preparing to deliver the news that policy wouldn't allow it, that rules were rules, that she was sorry but... Adrian stepped forward. But before Adrian could speak, before that moment arrived when everything would change, Raina Matthews stood frozen at the counter, trapped in a humiliation so profound it felt like drowning. And to understand why this moment cost her so much, why asking for expired cake felt like surrendering the last piece of herself, you had to know where she'd been 6 months ago, when her life still made sense. 6 months ago, Raina Matthews had been tired but hopeful. She worked 2 jobs, days as a nursing assistant at Riverside Care Facility, evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. 16-hour days that left her exhausted but proud, because every paycheck meant Zara had what she needed. A roof over her head, food in the refrigerator, new school shoes when the old ones wore out. It wasn't easy, especially after Marcus left, but she was managing. She was surviving. She believed things would get better. Then Marcus came back. Not to reconcile, not to apologize for walking out when Zara was 5, leaving without explanation or forwarding address. He came back with a key he'd never returned and a smile that should have warned her. While she worked her double shift, he emptied their joint savings account. Every dollar she'd scraped together over 2 years and disappeared again. $3,200 gone in the time it took her to wipe down hospital beds and mop office floors. The police said it wasn't technically theft since his name was still on the account. Her lawyer, the free one from legal aid, said pursuing him would cost more than she'd recover. The bills started mounting immediately after that. Rent came due. The electric company sent a final notice. And then Zara had an asthma attack. The bad kind that meant an emergency room visit, an ambulance ride, medications they couldn't afford. Even with Medicaid, the copays and uncovered expenses piled up like snow drifting against a door, blocking any path forward. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, impersonal and final. 30 days to vacate. She begged for more time, explained about the stolen savings, promised she'd catch up. The landlord was sympathetic but firm. He had his own bills, his own problems. By the end of the month, Raina and Zara were packing their belongings into her 15-year-old sedan, trying to figure out where home would be now. The downward spiral happened faster than she'd imagined possible. They lived in the car for 2 weeks, parked in different locations each night to avoid police who moved homeless people along like litter to be swept away. Raina washed up in gas station bathrooms, changed into her scrubs in the car while Zara pretended not to see. But without a stable address, without childcare she could afford, keeping both jobs became impossible. She missed shifts because Zara was sick. She showed up late because finding safe parking took longer than expected. First, the cleaning company let her go. Then the care facility, regretfully, did the same. "When are we going home, Mama?" Zara asked every night from the back seat, wrapped in the blanket from her old bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit that was the only toy they'd kept. "Soon, baby," Raina lied, her heart breaking with every repetition. Soon. They sold belongings piece by piece, watching their life reduce to what fit in a duffel bag. Zara's toys went first, all but the rabbit. Then Raina's jewelry, her laptop, the coffee maker that had been a birthday gift from her mother before she passed. Each item sold for far less than it was worth. Each transaction a small death of dignity and hope. Their last proper meal together had been 3 weeks ago. Fried chicken from a food pantry, green beans from a canned cornbread still warm. They'd eaten in the car with plastic forks, pretending it was a picnic, pretending this was an adventure. Zara had smiled, playing along, and Raina had excused herself to cry in the gas station bathroom where her daughter couldn't see. At 7 years old, Zara was too young to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly, how one bad decision, trusting a man who'd already proven himself untrustworthy, could cascade into homelessness. She only knew that her bedroom was gone, replaced by a back seat. Her school friends had vanished, replaced by the rotating cast of shelter residents. Her toys had disappeared one by one, sold to strangers who would never know the stories attached to them. She missed her purple bedspread with the stars on it. She missed her shelf of books. She missed her teacher, Ms. Chun, who always put smiley faces on her math homework. She missed feeling safe. But most of all, she'd learned to be quiet, to make herself small, to not want things. Because every time she asked for something, a toy she saw in a store window, a snack from a vending machine, she saw her mother's face crumble a little more. So Zara stopped asking. She became a ghost of a child, present but not demanding presence, existing without expecting anything. Her 8th birthday was tomorrow. She hadn't mentioned it to her mother, hadn't asked for a party or presents or even a card. But late at night, in the shelter cot they shared, she'd whispered a wish to her stuffed rabbit, just a small piece of cake. That was all. Just something sweet to mark the day, to pretend for one moment that life was normal, that she was a regular little girl having a regular birthday. St. Mary's Women's Shelter had become their home 2 weeks ago, when sleeping in the car became too dangerous, too cold, too obviously untenable. The shelter was overcrowded and underfunded, 40 women and children sharing space, designed for 20. But it was warm. It was safe. And the women there understood what it meant to have everything stripped away. Ms. Rosa, an elderly woman who'd lost her apartment when her landlord sold the building, watched Zara during the day while Raina pounded pavement searching for work. Rosa had even less than they did. Just the clothes on her back and a rosary she prayed with every night. But she shared her dinner portions with Zara, taught her card games, told her stories about the old country. The kindness of women who had nothing, giving what little they could, kept Raina from completely losing hope. But dignity was harder to maintain in overcrowded conditions. Sharing a bathroom with 20 other people. Lining up for meals like children in a cafeteria. Following rules that treated grown women like they couldn't be trusted. Raina hated every minute of it, even as she remained grateful for the roof over their heads. Coming to the bakery had been a last desperate attempt to give Zara something special for her birthday. If Raina couldn't provide a home, couldn't provide stability, couldn't even provide regular meals, maybe, just maybe, she could provide one small piece of cake. Even if it meant begging for garbage. Even if it meant standing in this beautiful bakery with her worn clothes and empty wallet, asking for what others threw away without thought. Now, standing at the counter with Elise Carter's sympathetic eyes on her, Raina's shame burned so hot she thought it might consume her entirely. Her internal monologue was a war between what remained of her pride and her desperate love for her daughter. Just leave. Walk away. Protect what's left of your dignity. But then, it's her birthday tomorrow. She's asked for nothing. She deserves something. Zara's small hand squeezed hers tighter, not pulling, not asking, just holding on. That tiny hand was the only anchor to hope Raina had left, the only reason she hadn't given up completely. She could feel everyone staring, could sense their judgment even if it wasn't real, even if they were just going about their business. Her cheeks burned. Her throat tightened. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve, to cease existing rather than endure this moment. Elise Carter's face showed genuine conflict, her mouth opening to respond. Raina could read the apology forming, could see the policy winning over the heart. The word no was coming, kind but firm, and Raina was already preparing to thank her anyway, to back away with whatever scraps of dignity remained, to face Zara tomorrow with empty hands and broken promises. The tension in the bakery stretched so tight it felt like the air itself might snap. And then Adrian Kingsley took a step forward. The silence that followed Raina's whispered request stretched so long it became almost unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on everyone in the bakery. Elise Carter stood behind the counter with her hand frozen halfway to the register, caught between the policy manual she was supposed to follow and the human being standing before her, whose desperation was written in every line of her exhausted face. Her eyes darted briefly to the other employees, Marcus restocking the pastry shelves, Jennifer arranging tomorrow's bread display. Looking for backup, for permission, for someone to tell her what the right answer was when every option felt wrong. The other employees had stopped pretending to work, their hands stilled mid-motion, watching the scene unfold with the nervous awareness of people witnessing something private, something painful. They wanted to help, you could see it in their expressions, but jobs were precious, and rules existed for reasons, and none of them had the authority to make exceptions, no matter how much their hearts insisted they should. Raina prepared herself for the rejection she could see forming on Elise's face. She'd been rejected before, by landlords, by employers, by the systems designed to help people like her, but that seemed to push her further down instead. She was almost numb to it now, almost. Her jaw tightened, her spine straightened in preparation for the blow, for the polite apology that would follow the word no. At least she'd tried. At least Zara would know her mother had fought for her, even if the fight ended in failure. Zara sensed her mother's distress the way children always do, with that uncanny ability to read emotional weather. Her small fingers squeezed Raina's hand tighter, offering comfort she was too young to have to give, bearing weight she was too small to carry. She pressed closer to her mother's side, making herself even smaller, as if by disappearing she could somehow make this easier. That's when Adrian moved. He stepped forward with quiet confidence, not rushing, not dramatic, just a man making a decision and acting on it. His movement broke the frozen tableau, drew every eye in the bakery toward him. Elise and the employees really noticed him for the first time then, not just as another customer, but as someone whose presence somehow commanded attention despite his casual clothes and unassuming demeanor. There was something in the way he carried himself, a calm authority that didn't need to announce itself. "Excuse me," Adrian said, his voice low and steady, directed at Elise. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Elise blinked, momentarily thrown by the interruption. "Ah, yes, of course. How can I help you?" Adrian approached the counter, positioning himself at an angle that didn't crowd Raina but made his intentions clear. He pointed to the display case, to the most elaborate cake they had, a 3-tier masterpiece with alternating layers of chocolate and vanilla, covered in buttercream roses so delicately crafted they looked almost real, decorated with fresh berries that gleamed like jewels under the warm lights. "I'd like that cake," he said quietly. "The 3-tier. And I'll need it packaged carefully for travel." Elise's eyebrows rose slightly. That cake cost over $100, made to order for customers planning celebrations. "Of course. Is there anything else?" Adrian's gaze moved across the display with methodical attention. "Yes. 6 of your turkey and Swiss sandwiches. A dozen assorted pastries, include some of those chocolate croissants. 2 containers of the fresh fruit salad. And," he paused, thinking, "a case of the juice boxes. Apple and orange if you have both." The order was enormous, enough food for several days, not just one meal. Elise's fingers trembled slightly as she began ringing it up, the total climbing higher with each item. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances, surprise evident on their faces. This was the kind of order people called ahead for, not something requested on a random autumn evening. Raina watched from her position near the counter, confusion replacing her resignation. She couldn't understand what was happening, why this well-dressed stranger was making such an extravagant purchase. Clearly he was someone wealthy buying for an event, a corporate meeting, maybe, or a family celebration. Someone whose world was so far removed from hers they might as well be living on different planets. The humiliation felt complete now, watching someone casually spend more money on food than she'd seen in weeks, while she stood there having just begged for garbage. The contrast was too sharp, too painful. She needed to leave, to get Zara out of here before the rejection came, before the shame consumed her entirely. She tugged gently on Zara's hand, beginning to move toward the exit. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Let's go." But Zara looked back over her shoulder, her eyes catching on a smaller strawberry cake in the corner of the display case. Pink frosting decorated with fresh strawberries, simple and perfect, and exactly the kind of cake a little girl might dream about. Her gaze lingered on it for just a moment before she turned away, resigned to disappointment the way she'd become resigned to so many things. "Wait," Adrian said. The word was quiet, but somehow stopped Raina mid-step. She turned back, confused, as Adrian shifted his attention from Elise to her. His eyes met hers directly, and there was something in them. Not pity, not judgment, but recognition. Understanding. The look of someone who knew what loss felt like. "This is for you and your daughter," Adrian said simply, gesturing to the growing pile of boxes and bags on the counter. Raina froze. The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. Her mind rejected them, searching for some other explanation, some misunderstanding. "I'm sorry, what?" "The cake. The food. It's for you." His voice remained calm, matter-of-fact, as if he'd just stated the most obvious thing in the world. Zara's eyes widened, her mouth forming a small O of disbelief. She looked up at her mother, then at the stranger, then at the beautiful three-tier cake being carefully boxed, trying to understand if this was real or just another wish that would dissolve into disappointment. Elise's face softened into a knowing smile, tears suddenly bright in her eyes as she understood what was happening. She began packing everything with extra care, adding napkins and plates, and even a pack of birthday candles she pulled from beneath the counter. Raina's legs nearly gave out. She reached for the counter to steady herself, her mind racing, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. I can't accept this. I can't pay you back. I don't have." "It's already done," Adrian interrupted gently. "Please, for your daughter's birthday." The words hit her like a physical blow. He'd been listening. He'd heard everything, her desperate request, her shame, her daughter's birthday. He'd witnessed her humiliation and responded not with judgment, but with this incomprehensible kindness. Around them, the employees had abandoned any pretense of working. Marcus wiped at his eyes. Jennifer's hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even Elise had to pause in her packing to collect herself, overcome by the simple beauty of witnessing compassion in action. Adrian stepped back, deliberately creating space, giving Raina room to accept without pressure, without obligation, without having to perform gratitude for an audience. He didn't wait for applause or recognition. He simply moved aside and let the moment belong to her and Zara. Elise placed the bags on the counter one by one, each one a small miracle wrapped in paper and ribbon. The cake box, the sandwiches, the pastries, the fruit, the juice boxes. More food than they'd seen in weeks, more hope than Raina had allowed herself to feel in months. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers touching the first bag as if it might vanish at her touch. This was real. This was happening. A stranger had just given them everything, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing. Time seemed to suspend itself in that moment, the bakery holding its breath, the autumn evening pressing against the windows, and three strangers, a desperate mother, her hopeful daughter, and a grieving millionaire, standing at the intersection of despair and grace, watching everything change. Raina's hands closed around the first bag, feeling its weight, solid, real, undeniable. Then the second bag. Then the third. The reality crashed over her in waves that knocked the breath from her lungs. This was real. This was happening. A stranger had just given them more than anyone had given them in months, maybe years, maybe ever. The careful composure she'd maintained through eviction and homelessness and endless rejection shattered like glass hitting pavement. Tears streamed down her face, not delicate, pretty crying, but the ugly, gasping kind that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Months of held-back emotion released all at once. Grief and gratitude and disbelief and relief and shame and hope all tangled together until she couldn't tell one feeling from another. She tried to speak, to say thank you, to explain what this meant, but words wouldn't form. Her throat closed around them, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. All she could do was stand there holding these bags of food like they were made of gold, crying so hard her whole body shook. Beside her, Zara's face transformed. The careful blankness she'd learned to wear melted away, replaced by an expression of pure wonder that made her look like the 7-year-old child she was instead of the worried miniature adult she'd become. Not greedy excitement, nothing grasping or demanding, but relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Mama," she whispered, her voice small and awed. "Is this for us? Really for us?" She reached out tentatively to touch the cake box, her fingers barely grazing it as if pressing too hard might make it disappear like dreams always did. When it remained solid under her touch, her face broke into a smile, the first genuine, unguarded smile in months. It was like watching sunrise after endless night. Around them, the bakery itself seemed to transform. Elise wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, professional distance abandoned entirely. She pulled extra napkins from beneath the counter, added more than they'd need, her own tears falling freely now. Marcus appeared beside her with a small bag of cookies. "For the birthday girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Jennifer hurried over with paper plates, plastic forks, a pack of birthday candles with pink and yellow stripes. "Every birthday needs candles," she managed, smiling through tears. The space filled with collective compassion, everyone present suddenly part of something larger than themselves, witnessing grace in action. Adrian watched Raina break down and felt something crack wider in his own chest. Her tears reflected his own grief back at him. All the times he'd wanted to fall apart but couldn't, all the emotion he'd locked away because feeling it meant drowning in it. Watching her feel everything so completely, so honestly, somehow gave him permission to feel too. He felt something he'd thought dead, the ability to matter to someone. For 3 years, nothing he'd done seemed to matter. Money meant nothing. Success meant nothing. But these bags of food, this cake, this small act of kindness, mattered more than anything he'd accomplished in his entire career. Emma's memory flooded back, vivid and sharp. Her laughter echoing through their kitchen, her birthday wishes whispered before blowing out candles, the way she'd hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. The memories didn't hurt less, but somehow they hurt differently now. Less like wounds and more like treasures. Understanding crystallized. Helping them was helping him heal. The weight that had pressed on his chest for 3 years, the grief, the guilt, the hollow emptiness, lightened slightly. Not gone, maybe never gone, but bearable. Raina found her voice finally, broken but sincere. "Thank you," she managed. "You don't understand. Tomorrow is her birthday, and I had nothing. Nothing to give her." Adrian's own voice came out rough, weighted with 3 years of unshed tears. "I understand more than you know." Their eyes met, and in that brief moment of connection, they recognized each other. Two people who'd lost everything. Two people who understood that sometimes life breaks you in ways that never fully heal. The recognition passed between them like a current, unspoken but profound. Zara approached Adrian shyly, looking up at him with those wide, hopeful eyes. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "This is the best birthday present ever." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself to her level, and for a moment all he could see was Emma. Emma's face, Emma's smile, Emma's voice saying, "I love you, Daddy," one last time before a fire took her away forever. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he managed, his voice breaking. "You deserve something wonderful." Zara smiled at him, that pure, uncomplicated smile children give when they still believe the world can be good. And something inside Adrian broke and healed simultaneously. He stood quickly, emotion threatening to overwhelm him completely. He needed to leave before he fell apart in front of them, before 3 years of carefully controlled grief escaped in this small bakery on Maple Street. He turned toward the exit. "Wait!" Raina called after him, her voice still thick with tears. "Please, what's your name?" Adrian paused mid-step, his hand on the door. He could leave now, disappear back into anonymity, Let this be a single moment of kindness with no strings attached, no complications, no future. Or he could turn around. He hesitated, the decision forming in that pause. A decision that would change everything for all three of them, though none of them knew it yet. Adrian turned back. The decision happened in real time. A choice made not with his head, but with something deeper, something he'd thought died 3 years ago in a house fire. He walked back to where Raina stood clutching the bags, her face still wet with tears, her daughter pressed against her side. "My name is Adrian Kingsley," he said simply. Recognition flickered across Raina's face immediately. Adrian Kingsley. She'd heard that name before, seen it in newspapers on buildings downtown. One of the city's wealthiest entrepreneurs, the man who owned half the commercial real estate in the downtown corridor, whose foundation sponsored hospitals and schools, whose name appeared on charity gala invitation lists alongside celebrities and politicians. Her shock deepened, her eyes widening as the pieces connected. This man, this incredibly wealthy, powerful man, had just bought food for her and her daughter? A man who could buy anything he wanted had chosen to spend his money on two strangers living in a shelter? "I know who you are," she whispered, and Adrian watched her expression shift, saw the moment the gift transformed in her mind from simple kindness to something else. Charity from a billionaire slumming among the poor, perhaps, or pity from someone so far above her station they existed in different universes. Adrian's jaw tightened, discomfort flooding through him. This was why he'd wanted to leave, why anonymity had seemed safer. His name changed how people saw him, turned human connection into transaction, made genuine moments feel tainted by the imbalance of wealth and power. "Please don't," he said quietly. I'm just someone who wanted to help." The silence stretched between them, awkward and weighted. Elise moved closer, sensing the tension. "Would you like to sit down?" Adrian asked, the words coming out more formal than he'd intended. "Maybe we could talk for a moment?" Raina glanced at Zara, then back at Adrian, uncertainty clear on her face. But something in his expression, the genuine vulnerability there, the way he looked almost as lost as she felt, made her nod. Elise gestured toward the back. "You can use my office. Take your time." The office was small, cramped even, a desk cluttered with paperwork, 2 folding chairs, a filing cabinet, a calendar on the wall featuring photos of bread. The three of them filled the space completely. Adrian folding his tall frame into one chair, Raina perching on the edge of the other with Zara on her lap, the bags of food between them like a bridge. Zara held one of the cookies Marcus had given her, breaking off tiny pieces and eating them slowly, making them last, her eyes darting between the two adults as if trying to understand what was happening. The class differences felt stark in such close quarters. Adrian's expensive watch catching the light, Raina's worn clothes and tired face, Zara's 2 small shoes with the sole coming loose. But Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, trying to make himself smaller, less imposing. "I want to tell you something," he said quietly. "About why I did this. Why it mattered to me." Raina waited, Zara still in her arms, both of them watching him with careful attention. "I lost my family 3 years ago," Adrian began, his voice already rougher than he'd intended. "A fire. My wife Sophie and my daughter Emma. She was 9. He paused, swallowing hard. "I wasn't there. I was traveling for business, closing a deal that seemed important at the time." The words broke slightly at the end, 3 years of grief compressed into 2 sentences. Raina's expression transformed immediately, professional recognition of pain. She'd been a nursing assistant, had seen loss up close, mixing with genuine compassion. "I'm so sorry," she said, and the words carried weight, sincerity. "I can't imagine." Adrian looked up, met her eyes. "Actually, I think you can. Loss is loss. Pain is pain. The circumstances are different, but the feeling." He trailed off, but she understood. She'd lost her home, her stability, her sense of self. He'd lost his family. Both of them knew what it meant to have the ground disappear beneath your feet, to wake up in a world that no longer made sense. "What happened to you?" Adrian asked gently. "How did you end up asking for expired cake in a bakery?" It wasn't prying, wasn't judgmental. It was genuine curiosity, human to human, not benefactor to charity case. Something in his tone made Raina feel safe enough to answer honestly. The story poured out, Marcus stealing their savings, the mounting bills, Zara's medical expenses, the eviction. Losing both jobs when living in a car made stability impossible. The shelter that was warm and safe, but stripped away dignity piece by piece. She told him about her nursing assistant certification, her work history, her determination to provide for Zara despite every obstacle the universe threw in their path. Adrian listened, not as someone planning his next response, not as a wealthy man calculating charitable deductions, but as someone who understood what it meant to fight and lose despite doing everything right. His attention never wavered from her face, and Raina felt seen in a way she hadn't in months. When she finished, Adrian was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said something that would change their lives. "My property management company needs staff," he began slowly, carefully. "We have buildings all over the city, and our managers are always looking for reliable people. Maintenance coordinators, residential assistants, people to handle tenant relations and day-to-day operations." He paused. "The position comes with an apartment. 2 bedrooms, furnished if needed. It's part of the compensation package." Raina's breath caught. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," Adrian corrected gently. "If you want it." Her pride flared immediately, defensive and raw. "I don't want charity. I want to work, to earn." "This isn't charity," Adrian interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "I need good people. You need stability. That's business." He leaned back slightly. "But I won't lie and say it's only business. I'm offering because I can, because I should have done more for people like you years ago, because watching you fight for your daughter reminded me that not everything valuable can be measured in quarterly reports." Raina's eyes filled with tears again, but she held his gaze, searching for deception, for hidden costs, for the catch that always came with offers that seemed too good to be true. She found none. Just a man who'd lost everything trying to help someone else find something. "You could start next week," Adrian continued, pulling out his phone, suddenly businesslike, giving her something concrete to hold on to. 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of one of my buildings downtown. Decent salary. I'll have my HR manager send you the details. Full benefits, including health insurance. He glanced at Zara. "The elementary school is 2 blocks away. Madison Elementary. It's a good school." "Why?" The word escaped before Raina could stop it, desperate and disbelieving. "Why are you doing this?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, seeing something she couldn't. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 years of grief and the first stirrings of hope. "Because I can. Because I should. Because for 3 years I've been going through the motions of living without actually being alive, and watching you fight for your daughter reminded me what it looks like when someone actually cares about something." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Because maybe helping you helps me too. Maybe that's selfish, but it's honest." The silence that followed felt sacred somehow. 2 broken people acknowledging each other's wounds, offering each other fragments of healing. Raina extended her hand formally, professionally. "I accept." Adrian shook it, and in that handshake something shifted. Not employer and employee, exactly, but 2 people agreeing to help each other survive. Before either of them could say anything else, Zara launched herself at Adrian, her small arms wrapping around his neck in an impulsive hug that caught him completely off guard. He froze for a moment, surprised, then carefully, hesitantly, hugged her back. This little girl who reminded him so much of Emma at Hurt, who was offering him comfort he didn't deserve but desperately needed. "Thank you," Zara whispered against his shoulder. "Thank you for helping my mama." Adrian's eyes burned. He held her for just a moment longer, then gently released her, standing quickly before emotion overwhelmed him entirely. They exchanged contact information, Adrian typing Raina's number into his phone, promising his assistant would call tomorrow with details. Elise appeared with the bags, helping them carry everything to Raina's ancient sedan parked down the street. As Adrian walked to his own car, a luxury vehicle that cost more than most people made in a year, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years, lightness. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it felt bearable now. Maybe even purposeful. He'd lost his family. But tonight, he'd helped save someone else's. And somehow, that made the world feel less empty than it had that morning. When Raina and Zara walked into St. Mary's Women's Shelter carrying their bags of food, every head turned. The residents gathered in the common area, women in various stages of exhaustion and survival, watched as mother and daughter navigated through the cramped space, laden with more food than anyone there had seen in weeks. Reina. Ms. Rosa stood from her worn chair near the window, her weathered hands covering her mouth. Mija, what happened? The story poured out in fragments. The bakery, the request for expired cake, the stranger who'd bought everything, the job offer that seemed impossible but was real. Reina's voice shook as she spoke, still not quite believing it herself. Reactions rippled through the room. Surprise, genuine happiness, and yes, some envy. The kind that was hard to hide when you were hungry and desperate and watching someone else receive the miracle you'd been praying for. But mostly there was joy, the kind that people who had nothing could still feel for someone else's good fortune. Ms. Rosa cried, tears streaming down her wrinkled face as she pulled Reina into a tight embrace. God is good, she whispered. Even when we can't see it, he's working. Maria Gonzalez, the shelter director, a tired woman in her 50s who'd seen too many stories end badly, appeared with keys in hand. Let's use the common room, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Every child deserves a proper birthday party. The impromptu celebration came together quickly. 5 children total, all residents of the shelter, all dealing with hardships no child should have to carry. There was Jamal, 6 years old, whose mother worked 3 jobs. Twin girls Maya and Mia, who'd been there for 4 months. And little Tomas, barely 5, who still asked every night when his daddy was coming back. They gathered around the small table Maria had set up, their eyes wide as Reina opened the cake box. The 3-tier masterpiece looked almost obscene in its beauty against the shelter's bare walls, chocolate and vanilla layers, buttercream roses, fresh berries gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Zara's face glowed as someone, Ms. Rosa, her hands trembling, lit the birthday candles. Pink and yellow flames flickered, casting dancing shadows across the little girl's wondering expression. The singing started rough and off-key but grew stronger. Happy birthday to you. Women's voices, children's voices, all joining together in the common room of a shelter where dreams usually came to die, singing joy into existence through sheer determination. Zara closed her eyes, her small hands pressed together. When she opened them, she leaned close to her mother and whispered, I wished we'd have a home again. Your wish is coming true, baby, Reina whispered back, her own eyes burning with tears. Zara cut the first slice with Reina's hands guiding hers, and then they cut more slices and more, distributing cake to every person in the room. The children ate with the focused intensity of those who knew treats were rare. The adults ate more slowly, savoring each bite, making it last. Stories began to emerge as the food was shared, memories exchanged like currency between people who had little else to give. Ms. Rosa told about a stranger who'd once paid her bus fare when she had nothing, how that small kindness had kept her going through a particularly dark week. Carmen, a young mother with shadows under her eyes, shared about the teacher who'd bought her daughter's school supplies when she couldn't afford them. I cried in the parking lot, she admitted. Not because I was embarrassed, but because someone saw us. Someone cared. The thread connecting all their stories was the same: unexpected compassion from strangers. Proof that even when the world felt cruel, there were still people who chose kindness. That humanity persisted even in the darkest corners. Reina watched Zara laugh and play with the other children, their bellies full for the first time in too long, their faces bright with sugar and joy. The food spread out across tables that were usually empty: sandwiches, pastries, fruit, juice boxes. Enough for everyone to have seconds, thirds even. She thought about Adrian Kingsley, about the grief he carried, about the family he'd lost. His generosity hadn't come from abundance, but from emptiness, from a man trying to fill the hollow space where his heart used to be by helping someone else's heart keep beating. The understanding settled over her like a weight and a gift simultaneously. His kindness cost him something. It meant something. Gratitude flooded through her, but guilt came with it. Why her? Why did she deserve this chance when Carmen still had nothing, when Ms. Rosa would likely die in this shelter, when dozens of other women fought the same battles with no stranger appearing to save them? Later, as the celebration wound down and people drifted back to their assigned spaces, Reina pulled Ms. Rosa aside along with Carmen and a few other women who'd become friends, the kind of deep, fast friendships forged in shared hardship. I got a job, she said quietly. We're moving to an apartment next week. The tears came immediately, tears of joy, of loss, of complicated emotions. Hugs were exchanged, congratulations offered through crying and laughing simultaneously. But there was sadness too, the knowledge that they were losing each other, that the community formed in hardship would fragment when one member escaped. I'll come back, Reina promised. I'll volunteer, I'll help however I can. Maria Gonzalez, overhearing, placed a gentle hand on Reina's shoulder. You give back by succeeding, Mija. By showing others it's possible. By being proof that this isn't where their story has to end. Later still, after the food was carefully stored and the common room cleaned, Reina and Zara lay together in their shared cot, a narrow piece of foam in a room with 15 other beds, privacy provided only by imagination and the darkness after lights out. Mama. Zara's voice was small, drowsy. Did that really happen? Or was it a dream? It was real, baby. Everything is changing. We're going to have our own home again. Silence, then. Is Mr. Adrian an angel? Reina smiled in the darkness, pulling her daughter closer. No, sweetheart. He's just a good person who chose to help. That's even better than an angel, I think. Because he didn't have to. He chose to. Zara fell asleep quickly, exhausted from joy and sugar and hope. But Reina lay awake, staring at Adrian Kingsley's business card in the dim light from the exit sign. Tomorrow she'd call his assistant, make arrangements, begin the process of rebuilding their lives. But tonight, she just felt grateful. Grateful for a stranger's kindness. Grateful for a little girl's smile. Grateful for proof that even in the darkest moments, light could find a way in. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was praying or simply acknowledging the universe or thanking Adrian himself. Thank you for him, for this chance for hope. For the first time in months, Reina Matthews fell asleep feeling something other than fear. She fell asleep feeling possibility. 1 week later, Reina Matthews stood in the doorway of apartment 3C, holding the key James Chen had given her that morning, afraid to believe this was real. Behind her, Zara gripped her stuffed rabbit with one hand and her mother's sleeve with the other, peering around into what would be their new home. The apartment was modest, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living area with a couch that had seen better days but was clean and intact. But to Reina, who'd spent months sleeping in a car and then a shelter cot, it looked like a palace. Sunlight streamed through windows that actually had curtains. The floors were swept. The furniture was simple but functional. Everything worked. Lights, faucets, the refrigerator humming quietly in the corner. Go ahead, baby, Reina whispered, her voice breaking. Go look. Zara took off running, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. A sound that would have annoyed neighbors in their old apartment, but now felt like music. She disappeared into the first bedroom, then the second, then back to the first, her voice rising in disbelief and joy. I have my own room, Mama. My own room. She appeared in the doorway, her face radiant. It has a window, and a closet, and the bed has a purple blanket. Adrian had thought of everything. The beds were made. The kitchen had basic supplies. There were towels in the bathroom, hangers in the closets, even a small television in the living room. He'd given them not just a place to live, but a home ready to be lived in. Reina sank onto the couch and cried, not from sadness this time, but from relief so profound it hurt. The first day of work arrived with nervous energy that had Reina awake 2 hours before she needed to be. She dressed carefully in clothes from the donation box at the shelter. Professional but worn, the best she had, and reported to the building's main office at exactly 8 o'clock. James Chen was waiting for her, a kind-faced man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on his head and a coffee-stained tie. His handshake was firm but warm. Mr. Kingsley spoke highly of you, he said, leading her to a desk that would be hers. Said you'd be perfect for this position. Reina's throat tightened. Adrian had vouched for her, put his reputation behind someone he barely knew. She couldn't let him down. Her responsibilities were clear. Coordinate maintenance requests from tenants, handle basic administrative work, serve as a liaison between residents and management. It was honest work, important work, work that mattered. James was patient as he trained her, never making her feel stupid for asking questions, never treating her like charity. By the end of her first week, Reina was excelling. Tenants complimented her responsiveness. James praised her organizational skills. She felt, for the first time in months, like a person with value beyond just survival. Enrolling Zara in Madison Elementary happened on a crisp morning when autumn was giving way to winter. Dr. Patricia Moore, the principal, was a warm woman with kind eyes who didn't ask probing questions about why Zara was transferring mid-year, why there was a gap in her school records, why her mother's hands trembled while filling out paperwork. "We're glad to have you, Zara," she said simply, and Zara, wearing new clothes bought with Raina's first advance pay, smiled shyly. On her first day, Zara made a friend, a girl named Sophie with braids and a gap-toothed smile who invited Zara to sit with her at lunch. When Zara mentioned the name that evening, Raina's chest tightened, thinking of Adrian's late wife. Life had a way of creating these small, meaningful coincidences. Routine returned like an old friend. School drop-offs, work, picking Zara up, dinner together at their small kitchen table, homework under the lamp Adrian had left for them, bedtime in actual beds with clean sheets. Normal life, extraordinary in its ordinariness. Adrian checked in occasionally, professional emails asking if everything in the apartment worked, if the heat was adequate, if she needed anything. Raina responded with updates. Zara loved school, work was going well, they were settling in beautifully. Their conversations were brief, formal, but underneath the professionalism was something neither of them named, a connection forming, fragile but real. Raina excelled at her job, receiving compliments from tenants who appreciated her attention to detail, her kindness, her willingness to go the extra mile. She saved money for the first time in years, actual savings, tucked away in an account for emergencies. She bought Zara new shoes when the old ones wore out, not from a thrift store, but from an actual store with boxes and sizes. She bought herself a warm coat for the coming winter. The dignity of earning, of providing through her own labor, healed something in her that charity never could. But guilt lingered too. Why had she been chosen when Carmen still lived at the shelter, when Ms. Rosa still slept on a cot, when thousands of others fought the same battles with no millionaire appearing to save them? 3 weeks into her new life, Adrian showed up at the building unannounced one evening. Raina was just leaving the office when she saw him in the lobby, dressed casually, looking almost uncertain. "There's a maintenance issue in 5B I wanted to check on," he said, but they both knew it was an excuse. Building managers handled maintenance issues. Adrian Kingsley didn't need to personally inspect leaky faucets. "Would you like to come up?" Raina heard herself asking. "We're just about to have dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti, but—" "I'd like that," Adrian said quickly. Too quickly. Then softer. "If it's not an imposition." Zara's face lit up when she saw him. "Mr. Adrian." She grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the small kitchen table. "You have to see my drawings from school. And I got an A on my spelling test." Dinner was simple, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread, salad from a bag. But sitting around that table with Zara chattering about her day and showing Adrian her schoolwork felt like something sacred. Adrian listened with genuine attention, asking questions about her teacher and her friend Sophie and what book they were reading in class. The domesticity was comfortable and painful simultaneously. Adrian could feel memories of Emma flooding back. Dinners like this, her excited voice telling him about her day, the normalcy he'd taken for granted until it was ripped away. But there was something new here too. The possibility that connection didn't have to be betrayal, that caring about Zara and Raina didn't mean forgetting Sophie and Emma. After dinner, after Zara had shown Adrian every drawing she'd made and finally been coaxed into bed, Raina and Adrian sat in the living room with coffee neither of them was drinking. "You saved us," Raina said quietly. "I need you to know that. We wouldn't have survived much longer. You literally saved our lives." Adrian shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a chance. You're the one who took it, who worked hard, who's making this work." They talked then, really talked, about their losses, their struggles, the ways life had broken them, and somehow brought them to that bakery on the same evening. Adrian admitted something he'd barely admitted to himself. "Helping you has helped me. I feel less hollow. Like maybe my life can still mean something." Raina reached across the space between them, squeezed his hand briefly. "You're welcome here anytime. We're family in a way. If that's not too presumptuous." "It's not," Adrian said, his voice rough. It's exactly right. When he left later that evening, walking to his car under streetlights that cast long shadows, he looked back up at the building. In the third-floor window, he could see Zara and Raina waving, backlit by the warm glow of the apartment he'd helped provide. A smile crossed his face, genuine, unguarded, the kind he hadn't felt in 3 years. Healing didn't erase the past. Sophie and Emma would always be gone, would always leave a hole nothing could fill. But standing there in the cool evening air, watching two people he'd helped wave goodbye, Adrian understood something crucial. Building a future didn't betray the past. Sometimes it honored it. Sometimes the best way to remember the people you'd lost was to help the people who were still here. 3 months later, as November painted the city in shades of amber and gold, Raina Matthews stood in her kitchen preparing for Thanksgiving dinner, and the transformation felt almost impossible to believe. The apartment that had once seemed like a temporary refuge now felt like home. Real home, with photos on the walls, drawings from Zara's class taped to the refrigerator, decorations they'd chosen together, warmth built from more than just working radiators. Zara had made honor roll at Madison Elementary. The certificate hung proudly on the living room wall, her teacher's note praising her work ethic and kindness. She had friends now, real friends who came over for playdates, who invited her to birthday parties, who didn't know she'd once lived in a shelter and wouldn't have cared if they did. Raina herself had been promoted to assistant property manager, James Chun praising her initiative and the way tenants consistently complimented her responsiveness. She had money in savings now, real security, the ability to handle emergencies without panic. More than that, she had dignity restored, the knowledge that she'd earned this life through her own labor, not just received it as charity. Adrian's transformation had been quieter, but no less profound. His visits had become routine, Sunday dinners, helping with homework, attending Zara's school events. He'd been Uncle Adrian at her school play last month, sitting in the crowded auditorium with other parents, applauding when Zara appeared on stage as a talking tree. His colleagues at work had noticed the change. He smiled more, engaged in conversations beyond business, seemed present in a way he hadn't been in years. The hardest step had come 2 weeks ago when he'd finally opened Emma's room. With Raina's gentle encouragement, he'd spent a Saturday boxing up items to donate, clothes that could help other children, toys that deserved to be played with again. He kept the special things, her favorite stuffed dinosaur, photo albums, the drawings she'd made. Opening that room hadn't erased his grief, but it had helped him process it, to let it exist without consuming him. When Raina invited him for Thanksgiving, Adrian had hesitated. Holidays are hard, he'd admitted. They were Sophie's favorite. She'd spend days cooking, making everything perfect. "I'm not trying to replace your memories," Raina had said gently. "Just maybe create some new ones alongside them." He'd accepted, grateful for the invitation, hungry to be part of something again. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Adrian and Raina returned to the bakery on Maple Street together. It was Raina's idea, a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to close the circle. Elise was behind the counter when they walked in, and her face transformed with recognition and joy. "Oh my goodness, I've wondered about you." The story poured out, the job, the apartment, Zara's success in school, Adrian's foundation. Elise cried happy tears, hugging them both. "This is why I love this job," she said. "You never know when you're witnessing the beginning of someone's miracle." They bought a dozen gift cards to the bakery, substantial ones, and asked Elise to give them to families in need. "For the next person who comes in asking for expired cake," Adrian explained, and Elise promised she would, already wiping her eyes again. But the gift cards were just the beginning. In the weeks following their reunion in the bakery, Adrian had done something more substantial. He'd started the Emma and Sophie Kingsley Foundation, focused specifically on helping single mothers find housing and employment. Raina helped run it, using her recent experience to guide others through the same terrifying journey she'd navigated. They'd already helped 3 families find stable housing and jobs. Carmen from the shelter had been their first success story, now working as a receptionist with her daughter enrolled in a good school. Ms. Rosa, too old for most employment, but not too old for dignity, had been moved to a senior living facility the foundation subsidized. Small victories, maybe, but to the people whose lives changed, they were everything. Thanksgiving Day arrived with the scent of roasting turkey and the sound of laughter filling the apartment. Ms. Rosa arrived first, her weathered hands carrying a homemade flan, tears in her eyes at seeing how far Reina and Zara had come. Carmen came with her daughter Sophia. James Chun and his wife stopped by. Even Elise from the bakery appeared with fresh rolls. Having closed the shop early to spend the holiday with this unlikely family they'd all become part of. Zara set the table with careful precision, proud of their home, proud to have people to share it with. Ms. Rosa blessed the food in Spanish, her voice thick with emotion, thanking God for miracles both large and small. Adrian carved the turkey, standing at the head of the table in a way that felt both foreign and right. For 3 years, holidays had been something to endure alone. Now, surrounded by voices and warmth and the smell of home cooking, he felt useful. Needed. Part of something. Let's go around and share what we're grateful for, Reina suggested, and one by one they did. Zara went first, her voice clear and certain. I'm thankful for my mom, for Mr. Adrian, for our home, and for that day in the bakery when everything changed. Ms. Rosa wiped her eyes. For the kindness of strangers who become family. For proof that God listens even when we think He's forgotten us. Carmen's voice shook. For second chances. For people who see potential instead of just problems. Reina's turn came, and she looked directly at Adrian. For hope when I had none. For the man who saw us when we were invisible. For dignity restored and futures rebuilt. Adrian's voice came out rough, weighted with 3 years of grief, finally transforming into something resembling peace. For being reminded that life continues, that love can grow again without betraying what came before. For learning that helping others heals your own heart in ways nothing else can. The evening stretched long and comfortable. Guests eventually left with containers of leftovers and promises to do this again next year. Zara fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from excitement and too much pie, her face peaceful in sleep. Adrian stayed to help clean up. He and Reina washed dishes side by side in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that exists between people who've seen each other's worst moments and chosen to stay anyway. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day? Reina asked, her hands in soapy water, her voice thoughtful. Every day, Adrian admitted. And I'm grateful I was. Grateful I listened to whatever impulse made me step forward instead of walking away. They talked about how one moment, one choice, could change multiple lives. How kindness rippled outward in ways impossible to predict or measure. How being broken didn't disqualify you from helping others. Sometimes it qualified you, gave you empathy that success and stability never could. Later, as Adrian prepared to leave, Reina walked him to the door. On impulse, she hugged him, not the formal embrace of employer and employee, but the tight hug of family, of people who'd saved each other in different ways. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing us. Adrian hugged her back, his own eyes burning. Thank you for letting me be part of your life. You gave me purpose again. You gave me a reason to keep going. Walking to his car, he looked back at the apartment building, at the lit window where Reina stood watching, making sure he got to his car safely. He thought of Sophie and Emma, and for the first time, the thought didn't just hurt, it felt like blessing, like approval, like they'd want him to build new connections, to find new purpose, to let love grow again in different forms. Loving them didn't mean he couldn't care about Reina and Zara. It meant honoring their memory by living fully, by being the kind of person they believed him to be. 6 months ago, a desperate mother had walked into a bakery asking for expired cake, prepared to beg for garbage to give her daughter something special on her birthday. She left with more than food. She left with hope, with opportunity, with proof that kindness still existed in a world that often felt cruel. A wealthy man had walked into that same bakery seeking solitude, running from grief, trying to escape the emptiness that all his money couldn't fill. He left with purpose, with connection, with understanding that sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to help the living. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness become the foundation for entirely new lives. Sometimes what looks like charity in one direction is actually healing in both. And sometimes, when we reach out to help others, we discover we're healing ourselves, that broken people can still build beautiful things, That second chances come in unexpected packages delivered by strangers who see us when the rest of the world looks away. The autumn evening had brought three souls together in a small bakery on Maple Street. And by helping each other, by choosing compassion over comfort, vulnerability over protection, connection over isolation, they had all found their way home. Not to the places they'd lost, but to something new. Something built from kindness and watered with tears and tended by people who understood that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or earned. They can only be given and received with open hands and grateful hearts.
If this story moved you, remember that you have the power to change someone's life. You don't need to be wealthy. You don't need to have your own life figured out. You just need to see the people others overlook, to offer kindness when the world offers judgment, to step forward when it would be easier to walk away. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of compassion, these things matter more than we often realize. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways we may never see, creating change that echoes through generations. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, Now's Haven. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind us why compassion matters, why second chances save lives, why choosing kindness is never the wrong answer. And more importantly, be someone's miracle today. Look around. See who's struggling. Offer what you can, a meal, a job, a listening ear, a moment of recognition that says, I see you. You matter. You're not invisible. Because you never know when a simple act of kindness will echo through eternity, transforming not just one life but many, creating ripples that spread farther than you could ever imagine. Sometimes all it takes is one person choosing to step forward. Be that person.